Do you have a studio in your home? Are you working outside of your home now, or?
So I do. What I've done, because I just live in a one-bedroom apartment, and I just moved in, so it's a huge mess. I'm not going to show it to you. It's just a bunch of boxes right now. But I'm making the living room into a studio. So essentially, I don't need a TV. I might have a small couch, but other than that, I'm just going to make the entire living room into workspace.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I've worked that way many times. It seems like a luxury to have a studio space outside of your home. And I mean, we met in Ventura, California, and you had the studio next to me at H Gallery and Studios in Ventura, and that's how we met. I mean, so, and that was such a luxury to have, that dedicated space. So have you worked that way before, or is this going to be a new thing for you?
Totally. Such a luxury to be able to do your work. At the same time, it's not always realistic to have that,
Right.
It's like, so you have to learn to really focus and have a good work ethic, even when you have the temptation of the fridge or the bed before you can lay down. So,
or the TV or whatever.
Or the TV.
Social media.
Oh my God, I know. I'm like, I almost want to turn my internet off. Like, I don't want the distraction of internet.
Yeah, right now may not be the time to do that. Like, having the ability to communicate with other people is a really good,
it's
good
like
thing. So
keeping us sane, definitely.
Zara, just for reference, do you have a website online, or do you have an Instagram that you can share with us?
Sure. So my website, it is www.ZaraMonetFeeney.com. So
okay.
ZaraMonetFeeney.com. And then my Instagram is Zara.Monet.
Okay, great. So people can find you if they're interested in seeing more of your work. I totally recommend it. I love your work. I like the energy of it. I like the perspective of it. And one of the things that I appreciate about your work so much is that there's a queer voice in your work. It's not masked or hidden behind anything. What for you? Do you consider yourself a queer artist? And what does that mean to you?
I definitely do, and I take a lot of pride in identifying as a queer artist. For my work, I often reappropriate old master paintings that specifically have a very male-centric gaze, G-A-Z-E, and I'm kind of flipping that on its head and making it very feminist, very queer, and making a more critical, kind of critical view of those paintings.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, I'll be very exaggerated with like either sexual imagery, even if it's somewhat hidden. I am putting women together and having this kind of sexual push in certain paintings. And I think being a queer artist, it's so multifaceted in a way that a lot of what I do, even if it's just the colors I use or the way I compose the imagery, it represents how I think and my surroundings and kind of what sort of environment I like to interact with.
Can you define what queer means? Because I mean, I have multiple explanations of it for myself over different times in my life, and right now we live in such a unique time of gender identity and all these different movements that are occurring, and I'm curious what queer means to you, because I think it's important to have an individual perspective.
Yeah, so I'm glad that it's moved away from kind of a blanket idea. At least for the queer community, we're finding a lot of subtle nuances and differences in our, just from me versus you versus someone else. It's like everyone is so different, and everyone's sexuality, it's like a fingerprint. It can't be repeated twice. For me personally, you know, I'm more attracted to women, and I also don't even like the kind of the stereotypes of being a queer female, where you have to be either really masculine or really feminine. I feel like you can be whatever you want on however you feel. So I feel personally, I think the idea of queer is just allowing yourself to be fluid with your most authentic version of yourself.
I see that authenticity in your work. It's interesting that you reference classical paintings, but you do it from such a personal perspective and still speak to like a wider ideal of the queer identity. It's really, really very interesting. I think from the first moment I saw your work, I was just like, you know, not expecting to see this in Ventura. Like I was just like,
thank you.
I'm like, wow, where's she coming from? Who is she? Where is she? Why don't I see her? Where is she? I gotta go find her.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, my work is definitely very feminist, very queer, and because I am taking things that have, you know, I'm specifically drawing from French academic paintings, which are more conservative, more rigid. They have a very heteronormative gaze to them, and I'm trying to pick all of that apart, both compositionally, both in the imagery that I layer it with, in the colors that I use. I'm trying to almost make, you know, reverse everything.
Sure. And what kind of response do you get to your work from your audiences? Like positive, negative? Like what are the kinds of things that it invites into your work?
I mainly get positive, and I think it's very helpful to be in a place like Los Angeles, where people are more responsive to very unnaturalistic color schemes, to kind of sexually charged imagery, or you know, queer driven concepts or feminist driven concepts. I think where I'm located, it helps, it fits into this audience. Maybe if I were to show my work to a more conservative community, they might be less you know, respond less positively. I haven't come across that yet. Though I will say that in the more kind of traditional atelier style painting community, that I'm somewhat.
Oops. Oh, we froze.
I did get my master's. At first, my work was sort of, oh, you're not using naturalistic lighting or naturalistic colors. I think some of that can be off-putting to people that want things like extremely realistic or extremely natural looking, but I like to specifically alter the hues, not just because, oh, I like colors, but I'm thinking more conceptually. I want to really you know, make you aware that you're looking at this appropriation, and then kind of turn it back on yourself, kind of this reflexive vision of, okay, how do I view a painting? Is it like a window into another world, or is it where I'm more bombarded conceptually with the imagery? So anyways, I get mixed reviews, but mainly positive.
Good. Well, yeah. I mean, I have a positive response to your work.
Thank you.
I really like what you're saying about the ideal of, you know, changing skin tones and everything. I mean, when I was in college, I think in my first one of my first painting classes, I did a self-portrait, and I used yellows and things for skin tone. And then, you know, in the critique at the end of the semester, you know, many students were like, well, you know, I would appreciate it if you would stick to you know, some natural tones and things and everything. And I'm like, well, why? I'm like, if I have you in front of me for examples of natural tones and things, and I have photographs for that too. So why do I have to respond to the world in that language? You know, it's a very academic statement, right? To reduce something to like a technique or a color scheme and things. And I think academics are very important. I think you know, you need to understand a rule in order to synthesize that into something else.
Totally.
Absolutely. I think it's important. But I think we have enough reality in the world already. You know, like we could stand a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. And right.
Oh, just got frozen. Oh, come back.
Couldn't be, oh, did you lose me?
Yeah, okay. Go right back to the beginning of your statement. We lost that there for a second.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, the internet's kind of shoddy where I'm at. So I was just saying, I like when a painting exists entirely on its own and it couldn't be a photo or it couldn't be something in real life. It's like this whole other dimension that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think things like changing the lighting or the coloring helps push that more. Because I like to live in the world of my paintings versus, especially right now, currently what's going on.
Well, so like speaking about current events, just in case this is seen outside of the context, right now we're all in lockdown. The whole world is. So how is this affecting your working process and maybe the themes and things that are occurring in your work right now?
I was just saying, I have a show at the Lancaster Museum coming up in January. Like, fingers crossed if everything is somewhat normal again. But I'm gonna, because if you're not painting about, or if your artwork's not about the pandemic, you know, I don't know what you're doing. Like, I think all of us are gonna tie it into our work in some way.
Right.
For what I want to do, the gallery that I'm showing at, or the museum, it has two main rooms. So what I want to do is have one that is a very extremely fiery, warm tone, kind of more like graphic, bloody, but tastefully done. And then the other one, it's like very, very calm, almost like a lack of color and very cool tones. So the difference in that, and it's gonna be all installation painting. It's gonna like just take over the room, and I want it to be heavily inspired by the time, but still look like my work and still have, you know, a queer spin on it and, you know, feminist spin on it. But I'm definitely, I haven't started the series yet, but in my mind, I have all these ideas of how I'm going to incorporate both kind of visual imagery of specifically the pandemic, but also kind of the feeling of the pandemic. So one room is more of that like anxiety and kind of the craziness surrounding it, and the other is more of the calm in it, both in, okay, being isolated, no social interaction, and kind of that like silent feeling. Sure. And then not to get too dark, but also that the silence of like the people who have died from this. So kind of both of those feelings.
Respectfully, I mean, because we had a conversation about cultural differences, and I'm in Mexico City, you're in Los Angeles. And I had a conversation with a friend whom I consider quite intelligent and, you know, a great person, but his perspective was culturally so different on this, because he was just like, well, you know, 250,000 people, you know, that's a pretty good number. I'm okay with that. And I was just like, but you don't get to decide who they are. You know, we don't know what the actual loss is. I think it's I hate to say it's a benefit. I don't know how to contextualize it. I mean, I've gone through a pandemic, the AIDS pandemic in the 80s and the early 90s, and I watched my friends and, you know, artists just fall away. And I think about all the things that I've been able to create in my lifetime since then, and that loss of those voices and things. So, and that effect on our world will be, you know, I think it's going to be a very interesting opportunity for us to reflect on who and what we value and what our perspectives are. And I think that's going to come out in artwork in a very specific way, because artists, you know, they tell the human story of what's happening in the world. I feel like we have a responsibility to that. Whereas journalists will tell the facts and organize the information in a way that helps us orient ourselves, you know, but for, you know, we will look at the artwork from these periods and, you know, the way that we look at the artwork from the AIDS pandemic. I saw a retrospective of work at MoMA in New York City, probably 7 or 8 years ago. And it's so interesting to have that retrospective look back at like what was happening then and see it represented visually in front of you. Like, you know, and the energy in it, you know, still exists, like that energy of the artist who didn't survive that pandemic, or, you know, or was reflecting on the pandemic. So it's really important.
Really important. That gave me chills when you described that show. I mean, that's so heavy and so moving, and just so it's very important for people to see that.
You've used the word feminist a couple of times, and I'm curious of how you define that, because you know, I've talked to many different feminists, and there's so many opposing points of view, and I think it's the same as like the word queer. It used to be this word that, you know, like ACT UP adopted it for political means, and now feminism, you know, I know feminists who are in their 70s, and I know feminists in their 20s, and they are not the same viewpoints on things. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
But you also, I'm assuming you identify as a feminist. I mean, you don't have to be a female to be where you agree with equal women's rights. I mean, for me, it's really that simple. It's not that aggressive or like crazy. It's just simply having the same rights as a male. Like, that's really all it is. And I personally wouldn't use violence to get the point across. But I don't know what people, obviously I lived a very relatively privileged life with, you know, living in America, living in Los Angeles, where it is more liberal and women do have basic rights. I'm more trying to stand up for women around the world that don't have as basic rights as I do. Right. In many other countries where women are still viewed as second class or lower than, lesser than. But even on kind of a micro level, in a lot of cultures or religious organizations, women are always viewed as the second to the man. So I just don't agree with any of that. And I mean, I could go on and on about the little subtle things throughout my life that maybe a man wouldn't understand, like, you know, catcalling or thinking, oh, she can't handle it, or she's crazy because she's a woman. Like this very gender profiling stuff that goes on, which I'm sure it happens on your side too. But I just simply want to, you know, do it in my way, in try to inform people, try to help people understand that it's not this big, scary, like aggressive topic. It's like, all it is women having the same rights and viewed exactly the same. That's really all it is. So
it seems so obvious, and I think, you know, because we're coming, you know, we're sharing a dialogue, and we might have experiences different and everything. And I, you know, sometimes I'm just like, I really don't even understand. I'm like, I don't understand what the argument is. Why would everyone not have the same rights and be treated, you know, equally? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's such a minor thing. It doesn't detract or take anything away from another person to have another person be on an equal platform with them and have the same opportunities. It enriches us. It doesn't detract from us. So
definitely.
I think that's also a perspective of privilege. So you know, I live in a city. There's like huge economic disparity and disparity in opportunities based on economy, but also based on sex and orientation. And, you know, there are more obvious examples. I think, like I see it and interact with it on a daily basis in a way that might offend, you know, some of my friends in the States. They would get all upset about it. And I've had moments where I've, you know, made a stand and, you know, like, and everything. And then, you know, I realize, where am I? What context am I in? How am I approaching this that won't be, may not be understood? And I think that's what a queer artist does, is they take those experiences and then they translate them in the artwork, if not to directly call it out, but to maybe create a conversation around that, to give an opportunity, a context for people to come together and have that conversation. Have you seen that? Have you seen that happen in your own work? I mean, I know that you're a teacher as well, so these things must come up in classroom with your students, but also in the context of a gallery setting. Or...
Yeah, definitely. In both scenarios, with teaching, I'm much less focused on my own work because I don't want to seem narcissistic. But in critiquing students' work, I'll find opportunity to bring up social issues or bring up political issues and use certain things as teaching moments. In my own work, when I have gallery exhibitions, I'm very appreciative when people do ask questions and they say, what do you mean by reappropriating the male gaze? Like, what are you talking about? So I can use these things as, I don't want to what's that word?
Proselytize.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Yeah, I don't want to be too annoying or aggressive of what I have to say, but some people, maybe they just don't know, and that's fine. And I like when people ask questions and I'm able to have a conversation with them. And I'm not always looking to necessarily change their mind, because I don't know if just viewing one artwork has the ability to completely derail someone. However, I think it kind of opens their mind up a little bit on a conversation they may not have talked about otherwise.
Right. It's an opportunity to have a conversation. I mean, I've certainly I've gotten direct messages from people that I've known for years, and they've said things like, I've never thought of you as a queer artist. Why would you say that about yourself? Like I've somehow applied a brand to myself that is therefore, you know. And I've had people actually say to me, if you remove the word queer from your title, you might be more accessible, you know, to people. And I'm like, well, you know, as long as I have the entitlement and opportunity to call myself queer, I feel like it's a responsibility. I put that back in when Trump was elected to office, because oh my God, I almost said re-elected to office.
Oh God, no.
Somebody light some sage.
I know, right?
But, you know, I'm like, there are people who die for identifying themselves as queer. And so because I can do it, I'm privileged enough to live in a society and a location where I can do that with relative ease. I feel it's a responsibility, because I want to make sure that when, you know, if something happens to me, if there's like violence perpetrated against me, or I'm not allowed to have a resource that saves my life because I'm queer, if something happens to me and it affects the quality of my life, my artwork, or my ability to live, I want the people who appreciated my artwork and my life to remember that the reason I'm not there anymore is because I said that, and words have meaning. So it's a responsibility to me to put myself out there and to take that risk. even if it means I don't sell as much artwork because it's identified that way, or, that's about the people out there.
No, I couldn't agree with you. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's not only a responsibility, but I think I'm sure you feel the same way. I'm proud to be who I am. I have no embarrassment, nothing to hide. And I feel like it's what gives us that niche in our artwork. And I want to be part of that community. I want that to be a way in which my artwork is defined, and the way I kind of have these conversations with people in galleries, or it's like if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So I'm very proud to have that as my title, and I'm never taking it off. Like, that's who I am.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's an interesting. I love it when people ask the question, because I'm just like, oh, that's a question of entitlement. You don't have to think about that, and I don't want to insult the person who's asking the question, because particularly with people I know, I'm like, I know there's sincerity there. I want to celebrate the sincerity and the vulnerability of asking the question as well, because I know it's not coming to me from a place of violence or, a desire to put down. It's like, I'm genuinely interested in understanding what this is, and it's my responsibility to answer the question from my perspective. Your perspective will be different. Another person's might be different. It's, creating a queer art show for Mexico City of international artists this summer. And we've already talked about your participating in it, but part of this is because I'm extremely curious about what it means to other artists to identify as queer. So when somebody submits that application, they're taking on that title, and I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean to you? Because I don't think my perspective is unique, or well, it's unique to me, but there's so many definitions available out there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the beauty of having, I think that's the beauty of having a queer specific show, because, not just for our own community, but for outside the community, you start to see all the nuanced interpretations of that word, of that meaning, of everyone's own personal experience, versus if you had, which is great too, if you have a show and there's just one queer artist, people might blanket, oh, this is what queer art looks like. But really, queer art just looks like other art. It's just, we have that, our own personal experience. It's in a way, yes, it is very different than outside this community, but it's also very much, it's not like we're doing anything so wild that other people outside the community can't relate to it. It's like, we're still human, we're still relatable. It's all very similar experiences. It's just maybe slightly different than what you're used to.
Right. It's a human experience. We're all human. It's not.
Yeah. It's nothing.
Cut me and I bleed. Blah blah blah.
Right.
Hey, who are your artistic influences? Are there artists that you go back to look at and inspire you? Like.
Yeah, currently my favorite person is Julie Mayretu, which she just had a big retrospective show at LACMA, and I think it might still be there because they shut down the museum. So I think it's still there. I really like, honestly, I don't even necessarily, my work doesn't visually look like hers necessarily, but I'm very much interested in how she's using color, how she's layering her drawings, using just compositionally, she's just spectacular on what she does. So just as like a fan, I love her work. For my own personal work, I actually love a lot of photographers. I love Man Ray. I love Eggleston. I like how he uses color. I love I love James Turrell, which is like, I'm sure everyone loves James Turrell, but the way he's using color is just phenomenal. trying to think of who else. I also do appreciate the really technical atelier style painters. Manet, I love, and I appropriate a lot of his work. I love Ong, or Ingress, people say. I just something about the way that neoclassical or French academic painters paint things like cloth or jewels. I'm just fascinated by it.
Right.
Visual candy. It's just like so juicy looking. So I look to them a lot when I'm trying to make this really dramatic costume or dramatic lighting on something. I just want it to be that like luscious looking.
Right.
So I'm kind of all over the map in terms of inspiration, and I wouldn't say that, oh, only paintings inspire me. I feel like I'm inspired by films, I'm inspired by writing, lots of different things are put into my work, which I see in your work as well. I feel like you have a lot of multidisciplinary influences.
Yeah, and I think they evolve and change based on the context and what it is I want to communicate. And I see that in your work too. I think that's what makes it fresh and interesting, is that I don't think I've ever looked at your work and thought, yeah, there's a repeating pattern here and it's now like a metronome. It's like I know what to expect. I mean, you just continue to evolve, and I think that's really, really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel that way about your work too.
Oh, thank you.
This is just like the compliment hour.
Right. After we turn off the recording, you can tell me the truth.
No. I love your work.
Do you get to, in college, we have these like systems set up where we get critiques and feedback and things. Do you have a way to do that for yourself? Like, how are you keeping yourself honest and fresh? Like,
God, wasn't that nice when we had that?
I know, right?
Now we're alone in an island. I mean, I still have friends who are artists that we can talk about work with. My mom and brother, they are also artists. So
oh wow, I didn't know that.
And they're very, very honest. So that's a great person to run things by. I was just saying, my family, or specifically my mom and my brother, because they're artists, they're very honest. So they're not going to lie to me. So that's helpful to get that really honest opinion. Also, when I show work, you can kind of feel it in the viewers, like, okay, they're really, really digging this, or they're just kind of meh. So that's a good gauge. And then I think you just inherently can feel it in yourself. I hope I have a cool judgment on that. And I like to continue to challenge myself, both technically, conceptually, all of that. So if the very least, even if it's not working, at least I'm trying something new, at least I'm experimenting, at least I feel challenged, where I'm not just like on this mundane plateau of, okay, I'm just repetitively still, pumping out the exact same thing over and over. So hopefully, with all of that combined, I'm able to keep my work nuanced and fresh looking.
Well, and maintain momentum. I mean, I think the thing that attracts me to teaching is that I'm constantly learning new things from my students, but it keeps the momentum going. There's something about having to stand in front of a classroom of students and tell them, this is what you should be doing or something, and then you have to live up to that as well. You have to be honest. Such an important part of the creative process for me is honesty. Really, dealing with a subject or materials in an honest way, and allowing yourself to fail. Oh, like that to me is like the most essential thing, because I don't think there's anything more terrifying than stepping in front of a white canvas, with the expectations of whatever, from myself or other people. So like having the ability to fail is really essential. Really, really essential.
Definitely. And yeah, going back to what you said about teaching, that's so It's so true. When you critique others' work, you have to recheck yourself and think, okay, how do I tell someone how to make their artwork better? Like specifically, what do you change compositionally or technique wise? Like you can't just say vague statements. You have to be very critical and very specific. So that obviously can play into when you're making your own work. Okay, if my students were critiquing this, what would they say? Or if fellow, peers were critiquing this, how would they react? And yeah, I forget what I was going to say. Probably nothing important, but
I so really appreciate your time today, like talking about your work and what's happening with you and how you're maintaining and everything. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, one more time, remind us of your website address and your Instagram.
Sure. My website is www.ZaraMonetFeeney.com. And my Instagram is Zara.Monet. So ZARA.MONET. So
awesome.
Everyone can find me. Yeah.
Support.
Thank you so much for
follow and share the work of other artists. If we can't always afford, even patrons, can't always afford to purchase artwork in any given moment. So the most important thing that we can do for each other, which seems so simple and so obvious to say, is to follow, share, like the work so that it becomes more visible to more people and an audience builds up around, a community builds up around each other. So please, if you're out there listening, take the opportunity to follow Zara's work. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again for your time today. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so honored to be interviewed by you. Thank you so much.
All right.